Hello, everyone. Welcome to our breakout session, Parenting with Heart, Stories of Overcoming Challenges and Celebrating Triumphs, led by Kim Hill and Chandra Jones. We are so glad that you all are here. My name is Renee, and I will be moderating today's session. I will be monitoring the questions in the chat, and if you have any issues, you can send me a direct message through the Zoom chat. We ask that everyone stays on mute during the session unless you have a question or to participate in the conversation. This helps us reduce the background noise. We encourage you to be on video if you can, so we can see each other and build community. But if you are more comfortable with your camera off, or you have children or other reasons, we totally understand that too. If you would like to read the transcript or see closed caption for this session, please click on the button that says CC Live Transcript, then choose Show Subtitle. Again, that's CC Live Transcript and Show Subtitle. You can hide the subtitles by repeating this process. Please share your thoughts, questions, affirmations, or anything that is particularly interesting to you in the chat or through the reaction buttons. Now I will introduce our speakers. Kim Hill is the mother of 4 and lives in Raleigh, North Carolina. Her 13-year-old daughter, Caitlin, has bilateral sensorineural hearing loss due to congenital cytomegalovirus. I hope I did that justice, Kim, which is CMV, and has cochlear implants. Kim is passionate about CMV education and advocacy work and works closely with the National CMV Foundation to help increase awareness and connect with other families. She also works as a parent educator for the North Carolina Division of Public Health, teaching leadership and advocacy skills to parents across the state through the Parents as Collaborative Leaders program. Kim is a member of the Patient and Family Advisory Board at UNC Children's Hospital and has a degree in sociology from Utah State University. We're glad to have you, Kim. Chandra Jones is a parent leader, community trader, facilitator, and the owner of the Parent Engagement Group, LLC. So Chandra holds degrees in family life education, early childhood development, and mental health and social work. She served on numerous boards and committees and has the opportunity to speak at several national, state, and local conferences. She believes that parents and professional partnerships are essential for systems change, and that parents should be equal partners at the table, sharing in decision-making. Chandra believes that it is essential to show respect, then reflect, then connect to cultivate growth and understand the values that parents bring to the table. As a mom of 6, including children with special health and educational needs, Chandra has had to follow the roadmap to resiliency on her journey and encourages other parents to take the trip. Now I will turn it over to our presenters to start the session. Thank you all for being here.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Chandra Jones, and today Kim and I will share our stories as well as offer tips and tools for you to develop, refine, and share your story.
Good morning, everyone. The first thing I want to ask you to do is you don't need it quite yet, but later on in the presentation, you're going to need just a sheet of paper. You don't need a pen or anything else, just a sheet of paper, just like straightforward sheet of paper. So if you can gather that when you get a chance and just have that ready to go in a little bit. Okay, so I feel like I've been well introduced already, both earlier in this session and then in the session before. So I don't want to spend too much time on that, but here's a picture of my family. My daughter, Caitlin, that we'll be talking about the most today is the one on the left in the blue shirt. My husband and I both grew up in New Mexico, and we ended up in North Carolina for school about 15 years ago, and we love it here. We're really happy. One reason that we love it here is the access to healthcare that we enjoy, and so we've been happy. We have no plans to leave. All right, so what I'm going to do today is just kind of tell you my story, tell you a little bit about Caitlin, both just because I like to tell my story and also just as an example, if you're looking for ways to start telling your story to different organizations, here's just an example of how I do it and what I've done and what kind of works for me. And then we're going to talk about advocacy work that I've done just to give you some ideas, things that have worked well for me. And then Chandra will also share her story and information about advocacy work. And then at the end, we'll just have a discussion. And so I'd love for you guys to be thinking about different advocacy work that you've done or goals that you have or questions that you might have. And we will have time at the end to talk through those. Okay. So our story started at our anatomy scan for Caitlin when she was 19 weeks along. They noticed most everything looked fine, but they noticed that her bowels looked bright white. And they're not supposed to, they're supposed to be dark. So it's called echogenic bowel syndrome. And the doctor told us that this wasn't super common, but usually when it happened, they never really knew why. Like it kind of just would resolve itself and the baby was born healthy in the end. And so that likely we weren't ever going to get a reason for it, but it was possible that there was some genetic components going on. So we did testing for different genetic syndromes. Everything came back very unlikely for it to be genetic related. And everything else looked great. Her growth looked great. Everything looked fine. So they said, we think it's one of those fluke times, but we're going to monitor you more carefully. So at 26 weeks, they said they would start bringing me back for ultrasounds and stress tests and those sorts of things. CMV was never mentioned, or a virus of any sort. It was always just like probably genetic, a fluke thing, or possibly I'd had a little bit of bleeding and she'd swallowed it, but that was all we were told. So we started going back at 26 weeks, and that's when things got really tricky. Every time we went, something else popped up. My fluid was always low. Later on, her spleen was really enlarged. She had fluid around her heart. She wasn't growing like she should. She was really small. She wasn't like moving and breathing like she should. But still, we never got a reason while I was pregnant. We had no clue. A couple times they admitted me to labor and delivery to kind of monitor her for a little while. And both times, like, we were able to go home and we didn't have to deliver her super early. But we just were in this situation by that time. By the end, I was going to twice weekly ultrasounds just to keep a really close eye on her. And we had no clue kind of what was going to come next. So in July, Caitlin was born. I went in for another ultrasound and they said she was at a point where she needed to come out. And so they took me up to labor and delivery to start an induction. And before they could, her heart rate dropped really, really fast. And then it dropped again. So at that point, it became an emergency situation, and they did a fast C-section and had her out very quickly. And as soon as she was born and they could actually see her, they suspected CMV. So I talked a little bit earlier about CMV, but in case anybody missed it, CMV stands for cytomegalovirus, and it's a common virus that's around all over. But if you kind of catch it for the first time when you're pregnant and it passes on to the baby, it can have some pretty significant impacts on the baby. So that's what happened to us. Caitlin was symptomatic for CMV. So a lot of times babies with congenital CMV won't have any symptoms. They'll be healthy and have nothing out of the ordinary at birth. About 10% of the time they'll be symptomatic. So that's where Caitlin fell. She found that 10%. So she had a really low birth weight for her gestational age. They called it blueberry muffin rash on her back. It just was like little blue bruises all over her back. She had low platelets, which led to, it's called petechiae. And so she had little burst blood vessels all over her body and her eyes were bloodshot. Her liver and spleen were both enlarged. She had jaundice. She had microcephaly, so her head was measuring small. So she just had kind of a lot going on. But she did pass her newborn hearing screening. They had told us that kind of the most common complication with CMV is hearing loss. So we were excited that she passed that first screening in the NICU. So we stayed in the NICU for 2 weeks, mostly for her platelets. She had 2 platelet transfusions while we were there. And once those got stable and she started on some antivirals, we were able to bring her home. But we left the hospital with just tons and tons of appointments to come back to the hospital, right? For different specialist visits and checkups and such. And so throughout the years, these are some of the specialists that we've seen. You can read through the list. It's quite extensive. But we're followed by neurology for a while. She has an ENT that's an ear, nose, throat doctor, infectious disease because she had that virus. We saw an audiologist and still do. She was followed by a developmental pediatrician for a couple of years because she'd been in the NICU. Ophthalmology, she's got some eye things going on. We saw a dietitian because her weight gain was really slow. And then just her regular pediatrician who we worked really closely with and had kind of a different relationship than I've had with a pediatrician with my other kids, just because she was so involved and he had to manage kind of all those pieces. When Caitlin was 8 weeks old, we were referred to the early intervention program, and she started physical therapy and early intervention services for kids with hearing loss. And so we started that at 8 weeks and eventually added many other types of therapies. Basically, if there is a therapy, we did it. We did all of them. When she was born, and as she developed, she was just kind of globally delayed. She just was kind of behind in every area. Her fine motor, gross motor, speech, everything was kind of behind, except for social. She's always been very social. That's never been something that we had to try to catch up. So kind of our list of diagnoses that we've had include hearing loss, and I'll get to that on the next slide, vision issues, microcephaly, brain involvement, low muscle tone, feeding issues that have largely resolved, but we still have some sensory issues that we're working through, and ADHD as well. So she had, I try to be really careful with acronyms because not everybody knows acronyms and I don't want to leave anybody out. So the IFSP, that's what she had.
You have IFSP.
Yeah. So when they're little until they're 3, the individual family service plan. And then when she turned 3 and transitioned to the school system, she had an IEP, or an individual education plan. And then now she has a 504 plan. And the 504 plan just gives her access to certain accommodations in school. Okay, so now to talk a little bit more about her hearing loss. Her hearing, like I said, tested normal at birth. But because we knew that she had this diagnosis of CMV, and we knew that CMV can cause progressive loss, so it can happen later, right? They can be born with totally normal hearing and lose it as they grow up. So because we knew that she had CMV, we knew that we needed to follow up. And at 8 weeks, at our first follow-up, they found that she had a severe loss in her right ear. Her left ear was still testing normal. That right ear did eventually progress to profound, where she could hear nothing out of that ear. Her left ear held steady until she was about 3, and then she started testing at a mild loss. So that's when she got her first hearing aid. We called it her magic ear, and it was so cute and purple. I kind of still miss it. And then that loss fluctuated up and down. It was quite the process to try to catch it and, program her hearing aid for the right settings. That ear we kind of fought with until she was 9, when it finally was at a severe loss. So Caitlin has 2 cochlear implants. She got her first implant when she was 5.5, and that's on her right side, the ear where she had the loss first. And then her second implant came when she was 9.5, and she got that on her left side. So now at 13, she has 2 cochlear implants, and she's fully reliant on them for all her access to sound. She does not use sign language. We would love for her to know sign language, but we found that's really hard to access when your child has typically developing language, but that's definitely something that's on our radar for as she gets older. And she uses spoken language. All right, so here's Caitlin now. She's 13, which I can't believe it goes so fast. She's doing really well. She loves to read and she loves to write stories. She wants to be an author when she grows up. She tests her speech test normal in every area, and she does really great. Sometimes I tell people that she is deaf and they don't believe me, or they think that maybe she has a little hearing loss, but she's completely fully deaf. She does great at school. She's in a typical class with some help through her 504 plan that gives her like preferential seating and access to captions and things like that. But otherwise, she's doing really great at school. She is an excellent self-advocate. She lets people know what she needs. She doesn't use it anymore, but she used to use an FM system. So the teacher would wear a little microphone and it would send what she was speaking straight to Caitlin's ears via Bluetooth. And she used to go, like, if she went to specials or something, she would go and just like hold her hand out so that they could pass it on to her. And she was great at doing that. She is now a teenager and doesn't like to use those anymore, which they assure me is very typical for her age, but she's doing well even without it. And she's a good kid. She's very accepting because she knows what it's like to be different. So she's good at befriending those kids that might be a little bit different and kind of looking past those differences. She's funny. She's always had a good sense of humor and determination and grit, which I think is important and has done such a good job at getting her where she is now. She is also passionate about anything that she is interested in, which I think ties in with that ADHD. She's got this ability to super focus. And so sometimes that's a wonderful thing and sometimes it's a struggle. But she's a really great kid and we love having her in our family. All right, now I'm going to turn the time over to Chandra.
So my story is called From a Mother's View, and that there is no greater story to share than your own. So it was a beautiful sunny day with blue skies. As I looked out the window from my hospital bed, it appeared to be great weather for November. Little did I know those skies would turn gray for me in a few hours. I didn't have much of an appetite, and the nurse assistant called for the nurse. The nurse called for the doctors. I was in labor, and I had gone into the hospital 2 weeks earlier because I was experiencing preterm labor, and I was told that I would have to stay in the hospital until I gave birth to my child. So I was taken to the delivery room, and within a couple of hours, I had given birth to a beautiful little boy who was born early at 25 weeks gestation. You can click. The doctors rushed to resuscitate him. As he was stabilized, I saw him as they whisked him out of the delivery room in his incubator. I had no idea this would be a 105-day journey of going to the hospital every day as the weather allowed, because I live in Michigan, for me to see my little 1 pound, 14-ounce boy and having hope that he would survive. It was tumultuous, up and down days. He would do well one day, and then he wouldn't do so well as times when we were visiting him, we were asked to step outside because he wasn't breathing properly. And then one day came that the doctors approached my husband and I and said that Stephen, our baby boy, he would not survive and that we should take him off of life support. The nurse looked over and saw that Stephen had pulled, not the same day, this was a week or so after we were told to take him off of life support. The nurse happened to look over and saw that Stephen had pulled the ventilator tube out of his own mouth the day before Christmas Eve, and he has not been on a ventilator since then. At that point, Stephen was placed on oxygen, and there were many challenges during this time. He had a brain bleed, but that did dissolve. He had lung issues and other challenges, the steroids, he had issues feeding. He couldn't nurse. I had to pump because he couldn't nurse because it would take too much energy for him to suck as well as try to breathe at that time. So it was a lot going on with him during those 105 days. And so there were many days that I cried. I cried daily. It was difficult for my husband at the time, as well as we had a 5-year-old daughter who she didn't know what was going on, but she would color pictures so that they could take him. We took him to the hospital to put on our son's isolate. But it was a very difficult time that through all the tears, we just didn't know what the future will hold for Stephen. So the day finally arrived that Stephen came home. He came home on oxygen, and we didn't know that our journey would include early intervention and other services and various medical appointments. And Stephen did receive early intervention. You can click. As Stephen grew, he stayed in early intervention. He had a speech delay, and he will receive occupational therapy as well as physical therapy. But most importantly, he did not have to go back into the hospital as the doctors had warned. Outside of delays, he was like his typical developing peers. He was just behind. But Stephen received special education services throughout his schooling. Click. As Stephen entered high school, he still had some challenges with keeping up. Nevertheless, he was featured in an article in our local paper about early intervention, as well as the challenges that he had overcome. I am so amazed to look back and think that this was the child the doctors said would be a vegetable if he survived. That's what they actually told us. I tell Stephen that he has a purpose and an experience to share that should be shared with others. So I encourage you to share your story so that you can give hope and encouragement to others.
Thank you so much for that. So when I think about my story and CMV, there's a few things that I wish I had known. So the first is that CMV is common. I mentioned earlier that it's the most common congenital virus that babies are born with in the United States. It's also the leading cause of non-genetic hearing loss. So sometimes I tell my friends, well, not sometimes, so all the time I tell my friends about CMV. And sometimes when they're pregnant, they'll bring it up to their doctor and ask, like, what should I do? Or do I need testing? And without fail, I think every one of them has been told, it's really rare. It's not something that you need to worry about. Those kind of long-term effects are so uncommon. It's just not something you need to worry yourself about. And it does such a disservice for women because it's not actually that rare. Maybe Caitlin's situation where she was so symptomatic is a little bit rare, but sorry, I sent my whole family out of the house, but my dog is wanting to go chase squirrels outside. And so if you hear anything, it's my dog. I should have sent her out of the house too. But sorry. So I think if any of you are in the same situation where you have a child with a special healthcare need, whether it's, a disability or a health condition, whatever it is, you can hear the statistics all day long about how rare it is. But if it's for you, then it's 100%, right? Like it 100% happened to you, and it doesn't matter what the odds are. And I now just don't even pay attention to odds the same way as I used to, because I know somebody has to be that one person, right? And so I don't think just dismissing women when they come up with these questions is fair to anybody. But I didn't know about it, right? So I didn't even know to ask about it. I wish I had known, because it is common, it is serious, that it can cause a great number of disabilities. And it's also preventable, or it can be preventable. The leading kind of little carriers of CMV are young children. So if you have a young child at home, especially if they go to daycare or preschool, then there's a decent chance that they might pick up CMV in those situations. It just runs rampant with that age group. And it's not harmful to that age group. Oftentimes, they'll maybe have a runny nose, or they might not have anything. You might not even know that they're sick. That's kind of how CMV works. And healthy people with a healthy immune system, it's very mild to nothing, to no symptoms. You could have CMV and not even know that you have it, but you can still pass it on. And so you might have a cute little carrier in your house and have no clue, but there's a few things that you can do to help prevent that transmission. And that includes not sharing toys, not sharing food or drinks with your child, or really anybody when you're pregnant, not kissing your kids on the mouth, and just being really diligent about hand washing. They're pretty simple things that I didn't know to do. So I did share like food and drinks with I had a 2-year-old at the time when I was pregnant. I did share food and drinks with her. And while I was pretty good at washing my hands in general, I potty trained her at the time, and before that she was in diapers, and I certainly wasn't as diligent as I would have been had I known about CMV. So I think there's a few simple things that women could know about that would make a big difference. And so this is where I come from, where I know that it's kind of simple communication that women would appreciate hearing, but it's just not getting to them. And so that's something that we're kind of trying to change. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my advocacy journey. And so the first few years when Caitlin was born, we really were just overwhelmed. Like she had so much going on. We were in and out of the hospital all the time. We had tons of appointments. We had been given this long list of potential disabilities that might come from CMV, but we just didn't know. Like we had no clue what our future held. And we also had a 3-year-old at the time, right? So we were just surviving. It was a lonely time. It was overwhelming. We felt isolated because at the time, we didn't know anybody else locally who had a child with CMV. And it just wasn't a great time. That whole first year was really hard. And I wasn't in a place to do much. Like I had these feelings of anger and these feelings of wanting to reach out and wanting to like educate people, but I didn't have time. Like I just had to take care of my child at that time. As Caitlin got a little bit older, I felt like I was able to do a little bit more. I also was able to connect with people online. So again, I didn't really have anybody locally at the time, but I did have a listserv, if you remember listservs. That was the first thing I found was a CMV listserv where people could like send out questions and you would get an email. And then later there were some Facebook groups that I was able to join and connect with parents, both like more locally and also parents whose children were developing similarly to Caitlin. And so that was really, really helpful and really helped me feel less overwhelmed. And also it was helpful to see what they were doing, how they were communicating and educating and reaching out to give me some ideas. And as time went on and we had a little bit more time and I got a little bit more confident, I had gained some abilities of advocating just because I went to so many appointments. And the more you do something, the better you get at it. So I got better at communicating with our specialists and our doctors and our therapists. And I felt like I was ready to reach out and do a little bit more. So I talked about this in the first session, so I don't want to go over it too much again, but I reached out to our EDDI coordinator, and that simple conversation really led to where I am today. And so I'm so glad that I reached out when I did. I'm not sure what my journey would look like had I not made that first step. And once you connect with the right people, like I found somebody who was also passionate about CMV education, and she was thrilled to have a parent contact her and put me to work, right? She had all sorts of things that she was happy to plug me into. She just needed to find me too. So these are just some examples of things that I've done. Very few of them are things that I sought out. Most of them are opportunities that came to me. And I think that you'll find that as you get to know people and they're like, oh, so-and-so was asking about a parent in this situation, or, hey, I know this person, let's connect you to her. And so one of the first things that I did after that conversation where I spoke with our EDI coordinator, she called me a few weeks later and she said, hey, there's a CMV conference coming up. Would you be interested in attending? And the organization had some funds to send parents, like scholarship money, to the conference. So I was able to do that. And then in return, I spoke about the conference and what I had learned. And that led to many other opportunities and other conferences. So these are just some conferences that I've attended in the past. And then also from that led to me joining a group called the Parents as Collaborative Leaders. And this is a training that I present, and a few of the other women in this picture also present, but we present, it's 10 modules that was developed by a team of educators at the University of Vermont. And so it's 10 modules and they're all about different advocacy and leadership skills. And I'm able to present those to different groups around the state. Pre-COVID, they were all in person. As COVID happened, we learned how to kind of move them online. And so we're able to reach even more people now. The Training the Trainers program that I was involved with a couple months ago with Chandra came to North Carolina and helped teach a group of us. What we do is you take one parent professional and one professional, and we team up and we go into different organizations throughout the state to teach them how to involve families more in their decision-making processes. I've also been asked to give feedback on programs that might be set up for parents or literature that is going to be handed out to parents, just to get that parent perspective, which I think is really helpful. We've done a couple newspaper interviews, a couple news interviews. And again, I didn't seek those out. That was like somebody that had an interest in doing a story on CMV. And because I had some connections, somebody knew to refer them to me. Some other things that I've done that sort of feels like kind of like next level in terms of time and the people that I have to connect with is working on legislation, which is so hard and I haven't had a lot of success with, but it's something that is kind of like an ultimate goal. We also have a really fantastic CMV work group in North Carolina. So if any of you on the call happen to have any connection or interest in CMV education, feel free to contact me and we will loop everybody together with this work group. This was, we had been meeting in person and then again, COVID hit, and this was our first meeting after COVID started, virtual meeting, trying to figure out, we had great momentum. And then all of a sudden we just kind of weren't quite sure what to do with this. Unfortunately, a lot of our people on our work group are involved in like the infectious disease world and got pulled away to COVID. So we're kind of trying to bring back that work group. It's kind of been stalled a little bit. I also serve on a hospital advisory board. I sought this opportunity out. I felt like there was some things that could have been done differently when I was pregnant with Caitlin. Mostly that she had all the signs of CMV prenatally and it just wasn't caught. And that's further than I can do much about. That goes back to like their medical school training. And again, the idea that CMV is rare. So I don't think that they are taught about CMV as much as they should be. But I thought, I can't change the medical education system, but I can put my voice in this one hospital. and give my feedback and my experience and share where I think things could have been done differently that may have been helpful in our situation. I also work closely with the National CMV Foundation. They're such a great foundation. They do a lot of good work, and I'm happy to lend my tiny talents. There's so many wonderful, amazing CMV parents around the country that are just doing really incredible things. And then some things that I think we don't even think of as advocacy work can just be fun things. Like we've done a lot of like fun family events, mostly for kids with hearing loss. Those are really easy to access. But they've been great ways to just get to know other families. It's been really helpful for my daughter to get to know other kids like her, other kids with cochlear implants, has been hugely beneficial. And not just for her, but our whole family, because I think sometimes siblings just get pulled along for the ride, and that can be a really difficult place to be. Being the sibling of a child with special health care needs is hard. So it's fun to find these family events where you can bring the whole family along and just interact and have fun. And also they're a great way to often our therapists or our professionals are also in attendance at those events. And so it's really great to get to know them outside of the clinic setting and develop a friendship with them. And then again, those just lead to other opportunities as well. We have a audiologist that we just, we got to know through her visits, but also through events like this. And then when she had an opportunity to give a talk on CMV, she asked me if I'd be willing to join her just because she knew, that we had that connection. So that this is kind of one of my favorite things. These are our silver linings in this journey, these fun family events that we're able to do. We've also been able to do a couple of fundraisers for the National CMV Foundation at local restaurants, which is, again, just a fun way to get out and connect with other families. I've been able to do a couple booths at different events and talk to professionals or parents and just try to connect people that way. All right, so just some tips that I have for you as you are going through your journey and maybe starting your advocacy process is to use pictures. If your child is comfortable with it, I do have permission from Caitlin to share what I share. And I feel like I might be getting towards the end of her agreement to that as she's getting a little bit older. But she so far has been willing to let me share her story. So I do like that I can share these pictures and kind of put a face to the story and let you see who she is. And they add so much richness to anything that you're doing when people can kind of make that human connection. And then just don't underestimate your story. Even if you don't have pictures, whether you do or whether you don't, your story is important. It's your experience. It's absolutely what happened, and sharing that, whether you think that you have enough to share or not, you do, and sharing that and explaining to people what happened is really important. You can also team up with other parents. You don't have to do this alone. I found that especially with CMV can affect kids so differently, and so having parents that have had different journeys is helpful because people will respond to different parts of it, right? People will be like, oh, that makes sense because that falls into my line of work, or I understand that situation. So I think the more you can team up with other parents, it's easier for you. You don't feel alone. It's hard to go in a room where you're the only parent. So if you have kind of that buddy, it's helpful, but also because then you can just add so much more to the conversation by teaming up. And speaking about being in a room full of professionals, I've been in some really intimidating situations before where I felt like all these people had big degrees and they were using words that I didn't understand and the science was far beyond me. But you are an expert in your child. You know so much about your child. You know everything about your child and your situation. And often, I think aside from maybe like a CMV researcher, I probably know more about CMV than most medical professionals. And that just comes with like the research and the lived life that we have. And so don't discount yourself. Everything that you have to bring is important. Okay, so what I want to do now, before I go to my last little bit, is we're going to talk a little bit about communication and communicating to different professionals. I talked about how sometimes maybe what you say will connect with one, but maybe it doesn't connect with somebody else. Like that's going to happen as well. But we're going to do an activity. So if you can take your paper, just take your paper and get ready with your paper. And I'm going to lead you through an activity with that piece of paper. Okay. I'll give you like 20 seconds to make sure if you didn't have a chance to grab your paper earlier. Okay, so I'm just going to read some instructions to you, and you just listen. It's really simple. So it just requires listening and following directions. So the first thing I need you to do is you take your paper and I need you to close your eyes. So you're not going to watch what you do while you do this activity. But again, all you need is a piece of paper. You can't ask any questions, so just keep listening, and here we go. All right, so take your paper and fold your sheet of paper in half. Okay, now tear off the upper right corner. Fold your paper in half again. Now tear off the lower right corner. Fold your paper in half. This time, tear off the upper left corner. All right, fold it in half a final time. It's probably getting a little hard to fold, but just one more time. All right, now tear off the lower left corner. And once you have that done, you can unfold your paper. And if you have your camera on, or if you want to turn your camera on for this part, just hold it up to the screen. And you'll be able to see what everybody's papers look like. And you might notice that even though you probably all followed the directions perfectly, not everyone's is going to look the same, right? Because your perspective, maybe the way your paper was turned, maybe the weight of your paper, whatever it was, might be different than what somebody else heard, right? The way your paper was turned is different than somebody else's. And so that's going to change the way your paper looked at the end. So individual perceptions vary. If you were given the same directions, why are everyone's products different? You have different contexts. You were not given feedback. You had to keep your eyes closed and you could not ask questions. So I think if we had all maybe been in a room together and you could keep your eyes open, maybe everybody's papers would look the same, but that's not what this is. And so often that's not a realistic life experience, right? We're all going to be given different information. We're going to have different contexts. And so life is just going to be different, and, kind of what works for one person might not work for another. So just keep going, I guess, is my point of this. If your paper looks different than somebody else's, don't get discouraged. It doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. If somebody doesn't understand why you did what you did, it's okay. Maybe that person's not like your advocate, or maybe they're not your connection, but keep working. So just kind of in closing for my part, there's a few things that I want you to remember. And the first thing is that the most important advocacy you can do is for your own children and your own family. Don't feel like you have to do more than that. I've felt a push to do more, and I've been in a situation where I have like the time and the resources to do more, and I want to do more, but it's okay if you don't do more. There was many years where I couldn't do any more. And there's definitely seasons in my life where I need to take a break or step back and just focus on my children, and not just Caitlin, right? I have 3 other kids that also need my time. And that's truly the most important advocacy work that you can do. I will say that the advocacy work that I've done with Caitlin has been beneficial to all my children. All our kids need advocacy at different times. And so it's important to remember that. It also takes time. The people that I know now and the connections that I know now, I just weren't available. It just wasn't possible to do now. When Caitlin was born, I couldn't have ever done that. And just remember that not everything is going to be successful. I wanted to share this picture of Caitlin because there was one time when I had a meeting with a state representative. So it was kind of like my first time to talk about legislation. And the legislation with CMV that we would love to see passed is just education for pregnant women and then mandatory testing of all newborns. So that's like my big long-term goal, which we're not anywhere close to yet. But so I had this first meeting. I felt like I was super well prepared. I brought this picture of Caitlin in, like printed it out and brought it in to show him. And while he was respectful of my time and he listened to me, I felt like I got nowhere. He told me that his daughter was pregnant and had other kids, and these things that I was telling him that pregnant women should or should not do, he's like, that would just be too hard for her. I don't know that his daughter would have told me the same thing. But that's kind of the feedback I got from him. And in closing, he told me that he would talk to his friend who was a pediatrician and get back to me. And so I felt very, very dismissed. I didn't feel like, he listened to me. And I also think he wasn't the right person to listen to me, right? Like his background, his history wasn't ever going to put him in a good situation to learn and make any changes. So sometimes you just have to say that one didn't work. Right. And maybe somebody else will be a better fit. There's
Kim,
one.
we do have a couple of, I didn't mean to interrupt. We have a couple of comments. I didn't know if you want me to read them. So just.
Yes, please do.
Laura had mentioned my little man nursed for a little while, but it was too much work for him. And then we had Shay was just saying, telling Chandra that we have similar stories, that she gave birth to triplets at 27 weeks. 1 pound, 10 ounce, 1 pound, 12 ounce, and 2 pounds. We had many challenges I'm just a year in, and we still have a few therapies and some milestones we're waiting to hit. Thank you for sharing your now pick. It warms my heart. And then we had one more. Samantha had said, I found out I had contracted CMV in 2015 while I was doing fertility treatments in 2016. I had no clue what it was. My oldest son has sensory issues because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what I've found as I've been doing this work and connecting with families. Like it really connects, or it really affects so many people. And those people that know about it know so much about it, but it's hard to get that word out beyond kind of that circle. So absolutely, Samantha, we will have to connect later. I've got one more thing I want to share, and then I'm going to send it over to Chandra for any last things that she want to share, and then we'll open it up to any discussion or questions that anybody might have. So this that I want to share, I talked about the PACL program earlier. It's the Parents as Collaborative Leaders, and the people who wrote that program or created that program, I found this quote by them that I really just loved, and I think it's really helpful for parents to hear. And it says, often when we first meet parents and say, hey, we want you to join us in this kind of leadership venture, they'll say to us, I think you might have picked the wrong parent. I don't know if that's what I want to do. Or more likely, they say, I don't know if I'm a leader. And while we recognize that not every parent is going to take on a huge leadership role that takes them far outside of their family, we do believe that actually all of you who are parents are leaders, and there are a lot of reasons for that. One is that on the day you first know you have a child with a disability, you're a leader. I think that just by virtue of the fact that you recognize your parenting experience is going to be a bit different from your friends, your neighbors, your sister, your parent, your brother, your mother, that takes you down a new path. And that is, in fact, a path of leadership. When you go to your first meeting, wherever that is, in your doctor's office, at your school, your preschool, and you start talking about your child, you're becoming a leader, because you're starting to give words to that inner voice that says, I know what my child wants. I know what my hopes and dreams are for my child. And so as you become more specific and get better at advocating for your child, you're becoming a leader. So if I can just leave anything with you, it's that you're all doing great. You're all leaders already. You're all advocating. You're all doing just what you're supposed to be doing, and just keep going. You're going to get better. It's going to get, I don't know if it'll get easier, but your confidence will grow and you'll be able to accomplish those goals. All right. Chandra, did you want to add anything on this one?
Sure. A few things to think about as you're crafting, developing, writing your story is about why share your story. So stories helped us connect. They deepen our understanding of individuals and shared experiences. Stories also reveal the details and impact of systems on the daily lives of families and children. Kim just mentioned her situation with going to a legislator, and they need to know how it impacts families. And also, as Kim said, sharing your story is important. And for a few reasons, it's important for yourself as well as for others. And some of the benefits of storytelling is that it can bring healing. I know the more I share mine, I'm like, wow, I went through that experience and it wasn't in vain, because it has helped other people. It also builds connection, and it also gives you a sense of empowerment. And also, as you're going through developing your story, considering your audience. So some questions to consider with the audience is, what is their education level? How many people will you be speaking to? Is it virtual? Is it in person? What's the age of the participants, their gender? And then where are you presenting? What is their purpose for being there? And then what is their job? And then are they parents or professionals? And when you consider yourself, use your own unique perspective and experience to create a compelling narrative. So if you are humorous, put some laughter into it. And if you're visual, think of ways that you can show visuals, have a PowerPoint, or sometimes I'll take the diaper that I got from the NICU to show people just how small my son was. But think about ways that you can incorporate your uniqueness into your unique story, and acknowledge any fear, shame, or lack of confidence by reframing any negative self-talk that you may have with yourself, and practicing self-compassion. Oftentimes we have compassion on others, but we need to have compassion on ourselves as well. And then find supportive communities, as Kim said, making contact with others that you can share your story with, partner up with. And something else to keep in mind is that sharing your story can be a huge risk. So by sharing your story, you can easily make a point. However, it also makes you vulnerable to criticism or misinterpretation. And sometimes the powerful lessons that our stories reveal are not fully appreciated. So we can grow fatigued and revealing private experiences that are frequently painful to recall. So that's just something to be aware of. And as you organize your story, think about what you want your audience to walk away with, whether it's knowledge or empathy. Have a beginning. When does the story take place? The middle, what happened, as well as the ending. What happened that you would like to conclude with, and the key themes that you learned. And also the call to action. What do you want the audience to do? You want them to share their stories, change policy, or include more parents. And finally, practice. Once you figured out the details, you'll want to practice, find a willing audience, and then practice and practice again.
Perfect. So we don't really have a lot of time for a last discussion, because I know we've got to finish this up in a couple minutes so that everyone can get to the next session. But if anybody does have any thoughts or questions that you'd like to share, we welcome that. I'm also happy to drop my email address in the chat. If anybody would like to contact me directly, I'm totally open with that. So I guess, thank you so much for attending. I really have enjoyed putting this together and working with Chandra, and I would love to connect with all of you in the future.